We need to open our marriage, I said to Will over dinner. He kept eating his pasta, not even glancing up. No. What do you mean, no? My fork clattered onto my plate. I'm your wife. I'm telling you, I'm not comfortable with this arrangement anymore. Do you know that feeling when everything in life looks perfect on the surface, yet a small voice inside keeps whispering, what if? That was me, 5 years into my marriage with Will. I'm Carrie, 36, and I thought I had everything figured out. Will and I had what most people would call a great marriage. He's the kind of guy who buys milk without being asked and never leaves the house without kissing me goodbye. A steady job, a cozy home in the suburbs. We had it all. We weren't the type to yell at each other or sleep in different rooms, but late at night, as I stared at the ceiling, I'd sometimes wonder if this was all there was. You and Will are literally couple goals, my friend Sarah used to say. I'd smile and nod, all the while thinking about how it had been years since we'd had a real adventure. Don't get me wrong, I loved Will. I just missed that spark, the butterflies in your stomach when you look at someone. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Friday, and we were at Sarah's housewarming party. Carrie, Will, come meet Jake and Laura. Sarah called, waving us over to her kitchen island. That's when we met the couple who would turn our lives upside down. Jake had a way of smiling that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was tall, with piercing green eyes and a bit of scruff that made him look like he belonged on a magazine cover. I've heard so much about you two, Jake said, shaking my hand. His touch lingered just a fraction longer than it should have, and I felt a flutter I hadn't felt in years. Laura was warm and full of laughter, her curly red hair bouncing as she animatedly shared stories of their recent trip to Thailand. They weren't like our usual circle. They were more adventurous, more vibrant. One dinner together turned into weekly game nights, and movie marathons morphed into deep, late-night conversations. I started choosing my outfits carefully for these gatherings, spending extra time on my makeup. You look nice, Will would say, oblivious to the real reason. I couldn't stop thinking about Jake, the way he'd catch my eye across the room and give me that half smile, or how he'd remember small details from stories I'd told weeks before. During my lunch breaks, I began daydreaming about him. At first, the thoughts were innocent, but they quickly became more intense. One night, I wrote in my journal, I've never met anyone like Jake. The way he looks at me, it's like he sees something in me I thought was gone. The bombshell came one evening when we were all having drinks on Jake and Laura's patio. Laura casually mentioned that they had an open marriage. My wine glass almost slipped from my hand. It's really strengthened our relationship, Laura said as Jake nodded, being honest about what we want and having the freedom to explore. It's amazing when done right. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind spun with possibilities. If it worked for them, why couldn't it work for us? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the solution to my restlessness. Will and I could stay married, stay committed, but also open the door to new experiences. Looking back, I realized I was already creating scenarios in my head where Jake and I could be together. I spent hours researching open marriages, crafting the perfect argument to convince Will. I told myself it was for us, for our marriage, but deep down, I knew the truth. It was for Jake. I'm Will, a simple guy with simple needs, a quiet night at home, a good book, and Carrie by my side. That was my version of happiness. Funny how one conversation can dismantle everything you thought you knew about your life. It started on what I thought was just another lazy Sunday evening. I just finished loading the dishwasher when Carrie walked into the kitchen with that look on her face, the one she gets before suggesting we repaint the house or adopt another cat. "Will, honey, can we talk?" she asked. I dried my hands on a dish towel. "Sure, what's up?" She led me to the couch, the spot where we had always discussed the big things: buying our house, deciding whether to have kids. But nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "I've been thinking about our marriage," she began, nervously fidgeting with a throw pillow. "What if we tried opening it up?" The words hit me like a slap of cold water. "Opening it up?" I repeated, hoping I'd misunderstood. You know, like Jake and Laura. They seem so happy, so free. Don't you think we could have that too? Of course. Jake and Laura, ever since we'd met them, they were all Carrie talked about, Jake this, Laura that. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. "You want us to sleep with other people?" My voice was harsher than I intended, but what did she expect? "It's not just about sex," Carrie said quickly, sliding closer to me on the couch. "It's about growth, about making new connections while staying committed to each other. Jake and Laura say it's made their marriage stronger." There it was again, Jake and Laura, the golden couple with their perfect open marriage. "And you've discussed this with them?" The idea of our private life being dissected over wine and cheese made my stomach churn. "Well, Laura mentioned she finds you attractive," Carrie said, trying to sound casual. "She'd be interested in exploring something with you." I stood up, needing space to put distance between myself and this conversation. "So, you've already chosen partners before even discussing this with me?" The following weeks blurred into a cycle of arguments, tears, and what Carrie called honest conversations. She bombarded me with articles on modern relationships, while Laura began stopping by more often, always when Carrie was around. Always with that knowing smile. "You're being close minded, Will," Carrie would say. "Just think about it. We could have incredible experiences. It doesn't mean I love you any less." But I couldn't shake the unease. The way Carrie's face lit up when Jake walked into a room, the way she laughed a little too much at his jokes, the constant pressure to agree. It all felt wrong. I was torn, wanting to make her happy, but resenting her for dragging us into this chaos. Then one night, during a dinner party, Laura cornered me in the kitchen. "You know, Will," she said in a low voice, "sometimes the things we're most afraid of are exactly what we need." I glanced past her to the patio, where Carrie sat just a little too close to Jake. Something inside me snapped. Was this what my marriage had come to? Feeling cornered in my own home, pressured to accept something that went against everything I believed? Fine," I said the next morning over breakfast. "Just one word." Carrie nearly spilled her coffee in excitement. "Really? Oh, Will, you won't regret this. We'll take it slow, set boundaries. This is going to be amazing for us." I watched her practically skip out of the kitchen, already pulling out her phone, probably to text Jake or Laura. The thought made me feel sick. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me. Carrie was sound asleep, more relaxed than she'd been in months. Meanwhile, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to step into the void. It's just physical, I whispered to myself in the dark. It doesn't have to mean anything. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't about growth or exploration or whatever buzzwords Carrie had latched onto. This was about something else entirely, and I'd just signed my own heartbreak into motion. Sid, I'd like to say I waited a respectable amount of time after Will agreed to the open marriage, but that would be a lie. Within days, Jake and I had our first date. Just coffee, but the electricity between us was undeniable. Sitting across from him, finally allowed to acknowledge what had been simmering between us, was intoxicating. You look beautiful, Jake said. Unlike Will's casual compliments, Jake's words sent a shiver through me. We stayed in that corner cafe for hours, talking about everything and nothing. When his knee brushed mine under the table, I felt like a teenager again. The next few weeks felt like living in a dream. Jake and I would sneak off for extended lunch breaks, sometimes just driving aimlessly in his car, playing old rock songs and stealing kisses at stoplights. Everything about it felt new, thrilling, and forbidden, even though technically it wasn't anymore. Tell me what you're thinking, Jake would ask, tracing circles on my palm as we sat in his parked car, hidden away in some quiet spot. I'm thinking this feels too good to be true, I'd reply, and he'd pull me closer, making me forget everything else. Back at home, Will was, well, still Will. Laura, on the other hand, had started trying harder to get his attention, wearing low cut tops and finding excuses to touch his arm. Will, ever polite, would smile and quickly find something else to do. Maybe you should give Laura a chance, I suggested one evening, trying to sound casual. She really likes you. Will shrugged, focused on his laptop. I'm not ready, he said, a smile flitting across his face. Will shrugged, focused on his laptop. I'm not ready, he said. A pause began to build, bloody morning dew. Our first real night together, Jake took me to a boutique hotel downtown. I told Will I was going to a wine tasting with some coworkers. The lies came easily now, far too easily, and that should have worried me more than it did. You're incredible, Jake whispered against my skin that night, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. This was what I had been missing, the passion, the intensity. But reality has a way of sneaking in, no matter how hard you try to ignore it. Like when I'd catch Will looking at me, unspoken questions in his eyes, or when Laura would shoot me these knowing smiles, making me wonder if she already knew what Jake and I were doing. Are you happy with this arrangement? Jake asked one afternoon as we lay tangled in hotel sheets. I'm happy with you, I replied, avoiding the real question, because the truth was far messier than I wanted to admit. Jake and I started going out more, coming home late with vague smiles and no explanations. Sometimes I'd wonder where Will had been, but I'd lost the right to ask those questions, hadn't I? Laura seemed different, too, less eager around Will, and sometimes I'd catch her watching Jake and me with an unreadable expression. Well, I ignored those nagging thoughts. I had what I wanted: Jake's passionate embraces, his unwavering attention, the way he made me feel desired and alive. "We should all have dinner together soon," Laura suggested one day. "It's been a while since the four of us hung out properly." I agreed, but the idea made my stomach churn. The lines were blurring. When had I last had a meaningful conversation with Will that wasn't about chores or schedules? When had Jake last looked at Laura the way he looked at me? I kept diving deeper into my affair with Jake, unable to stop. Every stolen kiss, every secret touch, every heated moment. It was addictive, like a drug I couldn't quit. This is modern love, I told myself. We're all consenting adults. No one's getting hurt. But deep down, I knew better. "I think I'm falling for you," Jake murmured one night. My heart soared, even as a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings I refused to hear. I was too wrapped up in the whirlwind that was Jake, his touch, his smile, his everything, to notice the storm brewing in the distance. Too focused on chasing this newfound happiness to see that the foundation of my marriage was crumbling beneath me. They say ignorance is bliss, don't they? And for a while, it really was sweet bliss. But bliss comes at a price, and mine was bleeding away. You know what's strange about hitting rock bottom? Sometimes you bounce. After weeks of watching Carrie practically skip out the door for her dates with Jake, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the night I overheard them whispering and giggling like teenagers during a barbecue in our backyard. Or perhaps it was Laura's constant presence, her sympathetic glances that seemed to scream, "I know your wife is sleeping with my husband." "Will," Laura said one evening, catching me alone in the kitchen, "you deserve to be happy too." I almost laughed at the word happy. I'd been going through the motions, pretending this whole arrangement wasn't tearing me apart, but something about the way she said it made me pause, looking up from the dishes I'd been scrubbing absent-mindedly. "There's a whole world out there," she added, leaning against the counter. "You're allowed to explore it. Isn't that what this was all about?" She wasn't wrong. That night, for the first time, I downloaded a dating app. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I needed to prove something to Carrie, or maybe to myself. I still don't know. The first few dates were clumsy and uncomfortable. I felt like I was cheating, even though technically I wasn't. Um, then I met Lena, not Carrie's friend Lena, but a literature professor with kind eyes and a quiet laugh. We spent hours talking about books, and for the first time in months, Carrie and Jake weren't on my mind at all. "You seem different," Carrie commented one morning, watching me get ready for work. "More relaxed." I just shrugged. "I guess I am." And I was. The more I dated, the more I rediscovered who I was before I became just Carrie's husband. I started working out again, bought new clothes, and reconnected with old hobbies. Laura noticed. "Of course, freedom suits you," she said one day with a knowing smile. Unlike Carrie, who seemed singularly focused on Jake, I found myself enjoying the company of several different women. Lena and I bonded over obscure novels. Emma, a yoga instructor, taught me how to relax in ways I'd forgotten. And Rachel, a divorced mom, made me laugh harder than I had in years. "You're never home anymore," Carrie remarked one night, her tone edged with accusation. "Isn't that the point?" I replied. For once, I didn't feel guilty about the flicker of pain that crossed her face. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carrie had pushed for this open marriage. convinced it would make her happier. Yet here I was, the reluctant husband, finding myself in the freedom she'd imposed on us. Then came the bombshell, at least for Carrie. Over dinner at their place, Jake and Laura announced they were moving to Dubai. I watched Carrie's face fall, the panic in her eyes unmistakable. Jake kept going on about the amazing job offer, the salary, the lifestyle awaiting them, while Carrie looked as though her world had been pulled out from under her. "Are you okay?" I asked her later that night, more out of habit than concern. "They can't leave," she whispered, and I realized she wasn't talking about them as a couple. She meant Jake. Her Jake. The next few days were surreal. Carrie moved around the house like a ghost, constantly checking her phone and having hushed conversations with Jake that usually ended in tears. Meanwhile, I felt lighter than I had in months, finally seeing our situation for what it was. "Well," Laura said, catching me before their farewell dinner, I'm sorry for everything." I just nodded. What was there to say? Her husband had been sleeping with my wife, yet somehow, through it all, she'd helped me rediscover myself. The night Jake and Laura left for Dubai, I sat in the backyard nursing a whiskey, reflecting on how strange life could be. Carrie was upstairs, lightly crying. For the first time in our marriage, her tears didn't stir any desire in me to make things better. "This isn't what I wanted," she'd said earlier, her voice small and broken. "No," I replied, feeling stronger than I had in months. "This is exactly what you wanted. You just didn't expect me to want it too." And that was the truth. In trying to break free from our marriage, Carrie had unknowingly freed me. Neither of us had anticipated that I'd be the one to learn how to fly. "We need to close our marriage," I told Will over dinner. He kept eating his pasta, not even looking up. "No? What do you mean, no?" My fork clattered onto my plate. "I'm your wife. I'm saying I'm not okay with this arrangement anymore." Finally, Will looked up, his gaze hard. "Let's be honest, for once, Carrie. You wanted an open marriage for one reason, to be with Jake. You had it all planned before you ever brought it up to me. And now that he's off to Dubai, you want to close shop? I'm not some switch you can flip on and off." The truth in his words stung. "That's not fair." "Fair?" He laughed, though it was devoid of humor. "You know what's not fair? How you and Laura teamed up to manipulate me into this. Don't think I didn't notice how carefully it was all orchestrated." "Fine." I slammed my hands on the table. "I'm not comfortable with you seeing other women. It stops now. Or, for what? Or we're done," I said, playing my ultimate card. I was certain he'd cave. Will always gave in eventually, but he just smiled. "Okay, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I'll have the divorce papers ready tomorrow," he added calmly. Panic gripped me. "I'll tell everyone you abandoned our marriage," I blurted, desperate now, "that you chose strangers over your wife. What do you think your precious Lena will say about that?" Will calmly pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, and my own voice filled the room. "Please, Will, just give this a chance. Jake and Laura make it work so well. I need this. We need this." Another recording played. "Will's being stubborn. Laura, can you talk to him again? Make him see how good this could be." "Ah, I have dozens of these," Will said softly. "Every instance of manipulation, every time you and Laura teamed up to push me into agreeing. So go ahead. Try to destroy my reputation. Let's see how well that works for you." I collapsed into the chair, defeated. I hate you. No, Carrie, you hate yourself. He was right. 6 months later, I'm still drowning in that self hatred. Every date has been a disaster. They're either nothing like Jake or worse. They remind me of Will. Last week, I sat through hours of a guy droning on about cryptocurrency investments. The one before that lived with his mom and needed a ride home. My therapist says I'm dealing with the natural consequences of my choices. I call it karma. Every morning, I wake up alone in my overpriced studio apartment, swipe through dating apps, and fight the urge to check Laura's Instagram feed, where she posts about their idyllic life in Dubai, or worse, scroll through Will's photos in my old house with his new girlfriend, living the life I left behind. I got what I thought I wanted, the freedom to date anyone I pleased. Funny how it feels more like a punishment than the liberation I dreamed of. Maybe you should take a break from dating, my friend Sarah suggested last week. She's the only one from our old circle who still talks to me. But I can't stop, because stopping would mean sitting alone with the harsh truth. I had everything I needed, and I threw it away for a fantasy that disintegrated the moment Jake boarded his flight to Dubai. They say you don't know what you have until it's gone. That's not true. I knew exactly what I had. I just convinced myself I deserved more.